With the return of the Lantern Rite, we are getting a free 4-star Liyue character that we will be able to choose and obtain for free. This includes old 4-stars and also new ones like Ming, who is releasing the same patch as this event. And so I wanted to give you guys my thoughts on all of these characters and their constellations, who I believe you should choose if you're having trouble deciding or want my input. We're going to be covering how strong the characters are and also how good their constellations are to help you decide how good getting another copy or your first copy of each of these units can be for you. Before we begin though, I want you guys to know that I do stream both sites on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested. And with that being said, let's get right into it. All right, so the first character here is the brand new 4-star Ming. Now, as I'm recording this, the 4.4 preview live stream just finished, and so Ming isn't out yet. Because of this, in order to accurately evaluate how good he is, how strong his teams are, and how valuable he is for your account, do be sure to check out my Ming guide, which will be out as soon as possible after the patch drops. With that in mind, here's what we know so far. Ming is a Pyro 4-star Claymore user who seems to be reliant on plunge attacking. It really looks like he will be a main DPS given how his kit works, with an emphasis on plunge attacks similarly to Xiao, and one who will probably synergize well with Xianyun or Cloud Retainer given how he's going to be on her banner, but obviously we don't know this yet, so take what I say in this section only with a small grain of salt. Given what we've seen in the past, Liyue and 4-stars have genuinely typically been pretty good. Last Lantern Rite, we got Yaoyao, who I'll talk about in a coming section, and she was great, so hopefully Ming will be too. From the looks of it, they're trying to make plunge attacking more meta or more, I guess, used, so I assume he'll be a decent 4-star, probably with constellations like C6, as a lot of new 4-star characters tend to get a lot better with their C6. But again, more on this one specific character as he comes out. What I can say for certain though is that his animations are beautiful. Everything in his kit looks like it's really high budget and really pretty for a 4-star character. He was dancing on water, he has a lion dance, a pet lion, he flips in the air, plunge attacks, and genuinely does look really cool. So if you're interested in how he looks or his gameplay, then you'll be happy to hear that you can get this new 4-star for free without having to go through the struggle on pulling on a banner for a 5-star character, hoping you get a 4-star with no guarantee that you'll get him. Being able to pick a new 4-star for free is great, but again, for a more meta analysis of what he does and how good he is, do be sure to wait for my Ming guide once he releases in 4.4. Personally, I'm really hyped for him though. All right, now the second character we have to talk about is Yaoyao. Yaoyao is a pretty new character, well, 1 year old at this point, a Dendro 4-star healer who in my opinion is a great support. Yaoyao gives you so much utility by giving you off-field Dendro application through her pet Yugui, who will fire radishes at enemies or at your active character, exploding on enemies to apply Dendro or exploding on you to heal you. You can do both at once, can have some AoE, especially if the enemies are grouped, giving you a bit of consistent Dendro application from off-field. She will get a lot more Dendro application and a lot more healing on-field through her elemental burst, which basically summons a bunch of them and gives you way more Dendro app and way more healing. The problem here is that you need to spend some field time on her, but a lot of teams where you want Yaoyao will have downtime in your rotation, and in others, like some quicken teams, you don't even need to use your burst to get full value. Yaoyao being a great 2-in-1 Dendro and healer option opens the door to many teams. While there are other options than her that I'll cover shortly, I have to point out that many of her teams are incredibly strong and can make use of her very well. Thinking of something like a Keqing Aggravate team or others really value having a 2-in-1 Dendro healer, as they oftentimes want an Anemo support, a offensive one ideally like Kazuha or Sucrose, an Electro support like Fischl, and then an Electro DPS like, again, for example, Keqing, to deal tons of Electro damage that you will be buffing with your Nemo character and the Aggravate reaction, which you can get very easily with just a little bit of Dendro. The Quicken Aura will last on enemies and won't get removed when you aggravate, meaning that just having some form of Dendro application and healing as your last slot is going to be the best thing you can look for. Because of this, Yaoyao fills this perfectly and is one of the best options in many aggravate teams. While yes, you could do other things like running Nahida and a Nemo healer or a healer of another element, Yaoyao is a great 2-in-1 that I highly recommend. With that in mind, she becomes less needed if you already have alternatives such as Beidou or Kirara, another 4-star who is a Dendro shielder instead of healer, will give you less Dendro application, but it's still enough for these quicken teams, so you can choose whichever one you have or want. With that in mind, Yaoyao can also be used in other teams, notably Bloom, with Nilou being a great option who can have some field time, use her burst, be paired with Candice or even without her, and make many new Nilou teams work. If that wasn't enough, you can also use Yaoyao in generic teams like Hyperbloom or Burgeon, although you typically would want another Dendro there as well to help get more Dendro application. Yaoyao is a character that I really like as a support, although keep in mind that other Dendro options can be used instead. Now, Yaoyao being very complete at C0 is someone that I don't think you really need to go for Constellations for, as a lot of them aren't great, although she does get better with some of them, like notably her C6. Yaoyao's 6 Constellation gives you more Dendro application through your Yugui, which is really nice. You'll get more healing, more damage, and especially more Dendro application through these AoE Mega Radishes that it'll she'll give you. Because of this, C6 can be one to go for, but it really is not needed as she is incredibly valuable at C0 and complete for the most part. Outside of C6 though, her constellations are kind of whatever. C1 gives you dendro damage bonus to your on-field character, which is nice with a dendro carry like Alhaitham, but a lot of her teams don't have a dendro carry, so it's more or less relevant. C2 gives her energy, C4 gives her elemental mastery, which again, a lot of teams she won't be proccing reactions, so it's not that useful. And then C3 and 5 give her talent levels. Because of this, C6 is nice, but for the most part, she really does not need constellations, so if you have her, you may not need to pick her anymore, but if you don't, then I do recommend getting her, unless you either aren't running teams where you could use her, or have a replacement like Beidou, Kirara, or Nahida with a healer, and don't need Yaoyao. Personally, I really like her though, and think she's a great 4-star option. Now, next up on the list, we have Xiangling, who we have to talk about yet again. Now, Xiangling is given for free by clearing the abyss, so everyone has her. It's not so much a case of should you pick her to get her, it's should you get her constellations. Well, with Xiangling, here's what you need to know. First of all, as I've said many times already, she is absolutely broken because of how much damage her Pyronado does, how long it lasts with one of her constellations, which we'll talk about, how much pyro she can apply, the fact that she can apply it with no internal cooldown, vaporize every hit, apply pyro for another character, and be used in almost any team alongside Bennett. Because of this, and how prevalent she's been for so many years in the meta, she's a character that is always going to be a great option to use as a DPS or support, provided you can build a strong team around her or fit her in an existing team comp. With that in mind, obviously you already have Xiangling, and she's also available in the monthly shop, but the reason why you may want to pick her during the Lantern Rite is if you can get her C4 or get closer to it. Xiangling's 4th constellation, Slow Bake, is one that will increase your Pyronado's duration by 40%, going from a 10-second duration to a 14-second one. This is crucial to giving you way more damage, way more pyro application, and make her that much stronger of a carry. Because of this, I think it is highly recommendable if you play Xiangling or plan on playing her to get any constellation you can that'll get you closer to C4. She's a character who, as I said, you can also get through the shop. You might already have since she's been available since patch 1.0, and you also get one copy for free. But if you can get her C4, then she will get much better as a carry and as a support as well, as 40% increased duration to your Pyronado is genuinely huge. Along the way, there are other good constellations like C3 that increases your talent level, giving you more burst damage and genuinely being great as well, and C1 that decreases the pyro resistance of enemies, being especially nice when paired with other pyro units. For her other constellations, C2 is useless, C3 is a bit of Guoba damage, and C6 will give your team power damage bonus, which is good for other power units, but not so much Xiangling, as her burst won't make use of this power damage bonus. Because your Pyronado snapshots, this means that any buff you give it at the start of its duration will last for its entire duration, even if it were to expire, which is another reason why her Pyronado is so strong. In general though, all you need to know with regards to should I pick Xiangling is 1, do I use her? And 2, if yes, do I already have her C4? If you don't, then getting another constellation of her, especially if it's either C4 or getting you closer to it, can be a good option, provided you don't need another character that we're going to talk about. Next up on the list, we have Beidou. Now, Beidou is a character who I've been calling underrated for like 3 years now. I think Beidou is insane in the right situations and decently strong everywhere else. Beidou, again, being an old character, you may have heard me talk about her a lot, but what she does is pretty straightforward. She has a burst with a stupidly high scaling that will bounce between targets, dealing really good electro damage to all of them. She also provides you with defensive utility, damage reduction through her burst, and gets significantly better with some key constellations, like especially her second one, which gives her burst more bounces. With this second constellation, she becomes effectively 5-star level in the right situations, sometimes having a ridiculous scaling when fighting 2 or more enemies, especially 2. Like, I'll put some numbers on screen showing you just how much motion value her burst can have, what scaling it effectively has if you're making use of all of its bounces. In some of the traumatizing past abysses we've had, like the one with those 2 constipated beasts that I hated, Beidou was extremely good because her burst would fire a lightning discharge that would bounce between the 2 targets, bounce back and forth between them, and just constantly shred their HP. With that in mind, even if there's more than 2 enemies, Beidou can still be good in AoE situations, but as long as there's more than one, her burst can bounce from an enemy to another enemy, making her great in AoE content, especially when it's like 2 or 3 big enemies that you're fighting at a time. Generally though, her weakness will be in single target situations, although a lot of her teams can help alleviate this weakness, like running her as your second Electro option in a Hyper Bloom team or in Electro Charge teams paired with good units like Fischl or Xingqiu. Outside of her C2 though, you can still pick Beidou if you want either C5 for more burst damage or C6 for more electro damage to your entire team, being great in a lot of her teams, especially if you pair her with another electro character. Beidou is also someone whose burst can snapshot, meaning that if you give her any buffs, she can keep them for the entire duration of her burst. My only complaint with Beidou is in certain abyss rotations where there's just a lot of boss enemies, but she is someone who is consistently pretty good and sometimes absolutely amazing, so I really do like her and think she's worth going for and getting her second second constellation. Do keep in mind that Beidou and also Xiangling, who we talked about, are available in the rotating monthly shop, whereas some of the other characters in this video aren't, so keep that in mind. There's a lot of these characters that you want. Another character who is available in the shop, but who's absolutely broken, one of the most broken characters in the game, if not the most broken, but that's a conversation for another video, is going to be Xingqiu. Now, similarly with Xiangling, Xingqiu's an old unit who I feel like I've talked about so many times already, and while he as a base C0 unit is genuinely still broken, he is someone who also has incredibly valuable constellations, going all the way to his, in my opinion, very broken C6. The reason why Xingqiu is such a broken unit, in case you don't know, is because he's the premier off-field Hydro applier. Xingqiu has always distinguished himself as being the premier off-field Hydro applier for virtually the most off-field Hydro application, paired with insane amounts of single target damage and defensive utility like damage reduction and also healing. Xingqiu's rain swords will also give you damage reduction, which is great, and his burst genuinely applies so much Hydro, which can enable so many different reactions. You can pair him with pyro carries like Hu Tao to constantly vaporize, cryo characters to freeze, dendro characters to bloom, hyper bloom, or burgeon, electro characters to electrocharge non-stop, on top of just having good enough single target damage to where he's used even when you don't really care about the reaction. Outside of just that though, Hydro is pretty broken in general, and you can also pair him with units that are similar to him, like Yelan or Farina, who also have really good Hydro damage and who synergize well with one another. The only requirement for Xingqiu is that you normal attack to maximize his rain swords, because if you don't normal attack, they won't fire. But as long as you can do that, then he's one of the strongest units you can pair with most characters in the game, being a big part of a vast majority of the strong teams as a go-to Hydro option. Now, a lot of people will have Xingqiu by now, so what I want to emphasize is how good the constellations are. Now, as I said, he is available every few months in the shop, but I want to emphasize that his constellations, basically all of them except C1 and also kind of C5, are absolutely amazing. C2 decreases the Hydro resistance of enemies, being great alone or especially with another Hydro character in very powerful double Hydro teams. C3 increases his burst damage significantly. C4 will increase the damage of his elemental skill, and so will his C5. Both of these are kind of whatever, but nice increases, whereas 2 and 3 are insane. And then lastly, C6 is one of the more broken constellations just in general, as not only will it give Xingqiu energy, but more importantly, it will also give him additional rain swords, meaning more instances of damage and Hydro application. Both of these things are very relevant. It increases his damage significantly, being sometimes around 40% more personal damage, on top of getting Hydro application and energy, being an insane constellation to go for. And so every step along the way, C1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 just gets you closer to 6, meaning that I always think they're worth getting for the long term of your account. Now, there are alternatives to Xingqiu. There's a lot of new Hydro units that are really good that you can use, but Xingqiu will always remain one of, if not the best ones, as an off-field support who can be ran either alone or with another really strong Hydro off-fielder that you may already have. If you have Yelan, well, you could use Xingqiu with her or in another team, for example. Now, moving on for the next characters, and I'll try to not rant for as long, we first of all have Ningguang. Ningguang is a pretty solid either main DPS or sub DPS, as I feel like in my personal experience, I like using her to kind of quick swap around with other Geo characters, and she's one who isn't the most meta defining. She's not the most prevalent in the meta, but she's a okay option as either another Geo slot in a team that already has a Geo character as a battery and sub DPS, sort of a burst support, or as a more proactive on-fielder. She can have a more supportive role with something like the Petra set, and is someone who does get quite a bit more personal damage with constellations. While Ningguang won't be as strong of a DPS option as some of the other 4-stars that we mentioned, like Xiangling or Beidou, Ningguang is a decent option that I personally always really liked playing, despite her not being the most meta. Ningguang also gets better with certain Geo units, notably Navia, who's new, and who, if you don't have a 5-star like Zhongli or Albedo as a support, Ningguang can be a decent sub DPS if you want to run a double Geo team as a battery for your Navia, who could also give you some Geo damage bonus if you walk through her screen. With that in mind, her Jade screen can actually be nice at giving your on-field character Geo damage as well, on top of being a battery who can have burst damage, making her viable with another Geo unit. For her personal damage, a lot of her constellations do help a lot. C1 helps with normal attacks. C2 is especially nice as it resets the cooldown of your Jade screen when it's shattered, allowing you to use it twice if you can shatter it against like a boss or something. While this won't give you more energy, it'll give you more damage. And then similarly, her 6th constellation, after using her burst, will give her 7-star Jades, allowing her to charge attack immediately for a lot more burst damage by using her skill, her burst, and then firing a charge attack, and then not even having to stay on her if you want to swap out. Her C6 is her most important constellation that you can go for if you really do like Ningguang, but not an absolute need. Also, ignore my 700 attack. I'm on Thrilling Tales right now. I don't know why, but it's usually higher, I promise. Now, next up on this list, we do have Chongyun. Chongyun is a cryo 4-star character who is kind of niche. He has a field that'll enable your on-field character to basically apply cryo cryo. It'll infuse their attacks with cryo is the better way of saying it. I don't know why I struggled with that. Allowing them to deal cryo damage, either with other cryo characters or if you want to do some weird cryo builds with someone like Keqing. But in general, he is mostly used as a cryo burst support for his decently high scaling burst and some utility like giving you normal attack speed and also having a second constellation that will decrease some of your cooldowns inside of your elemental skills field. With that in mind, there are typically better cryo options like Rosaria or Kaya who are really good at what they do, giving you good energy and cryo application from off field on top of having good personal damage. Chongyun can have some uses in some meld teams, notably when paired with Bennett, or if you just want to give your on-field character more cryo application, make a cryo build or help break some shields against certain enemies like the Cryo Abyss Heralds. But in general, he's mostly an off-meta pick who can have some use cases, can be a viable option, but in my opinion, he's not really that great when compared to other more meta cryo characters. With that in mind, I think his C2 giving you cooldown reduction is definitely nice and probably the best constellation as far as utility goes if you can actually make use of this cooldown reduction. For his personal damage, his C6 giving you a 4th blade from his burst will increase its scaling significantly. Next up in this same list, we have Xinyan, and regarding Xinyan, she's a character who kind of just is Xinyan. She can be used in like a mono pyro team. You can get some value out of her. She gives you a shield and a bit of physical damage for physical teams, but for the most part, there's almost always a better option that you can use instead of her, which is why I don't personally recommend her, but if you like her and just want her, then you can go ahead and get her. Generally though, she's not really good. As I said, some mono power teams can make her work, especially with C6 Bennett, although a lot of the times it will be your Bennett, your Xiangling, and your Kazuha carrying 3 of the most broken units in the game, but Xinyan can feel okay in those teams if you want to use her. She can be a main DPS who gets better with some constellations, like notably her C2 giving you crit rate and also giving you a strong shield when you burst, which is not bad. C6 can allow her to charge attack if you want to do that, and C4 can give you more physical damage by decreasing the physical resistance of opponents, making her more viable as a physical support. But as I said, there are better options for that, so typically I don't really recommend her, but if you want to use her, then there are some niche use cases, like notably in a mono pyro team. You can play her physical or do other things, but for the most part, there's just always a better option, so yeah. Next up on the list is Yunjin. Yunjin is genuinely a pretty solid option for the one thing that she does, which is buff your normal attacks. Yunjin is a character who will give you a pretty significant damage increase that scales on her defense through the form of bonus damage to your on-field character's normal attacks. Because of this, Yunjin can be used in normal attacking teams, although you do have to understand that she is someone who is quite energy hungry, usually requiring either another Geo character or just a ton of energy recharge on her to make her work. Typically, you'll run her on the Favonius Lance, giving energy to her and your whole team, while primarily being used to give normal attacking damage to your on-field character. Most of the time, she's used alongside someone like Yoimiya, but there are other characters that can make use of her as well. Yoimiya is the best example because most of her damage comes from her normal attacks, and Yunjin does contribute a good amount to some Yoimiya team's damage. She can sometimes even be similar to Bennett or replace Bennett, allowing you to use Bennett, who's such a valuable and strong support, in your other team and Yunjin on your Yoimiya team. You can also run both of them together, and because of this, I think Yunjin can be quite valuable in the specific team comps where you're running a normal attacker, again, primarily someone like Yoimiya, and want a support to help with that. She's not needed, but she's a good option in those teams, depending on what you're going for. Constellation-wise, you could go for her C2 for more normal attack damage, 15%, or C6 for more attack speed, which also can help for normal attackers. Additionally, Yunjin's 3rd constellation, increasing her burst talent level, will effectively give you more normal attack damage, so a good constellation along the way as well. Now, next up on the list, we have Yanfei, a character who can be a pretty decent 4-star DPS. She can also be used as a support with her very relevant 4th constellation, which is one that we'll talk about. Yanfei can be used, as I said, either as an on-field DPS in some teams like either Mono Pyro or Vaporized teams, potentially even with Farina, who just came out, who can give her teams a bit more value, especially when paired with another Pyro and a Nemo character to swirl everything and maybe have Bennett to buff your damage, and she can genuinely feel like a pretty solid on-field DPS, especially for a 4-star, and one who can be pretty easy to build, having flexible weapons, flexible artifact sets. He also has constellations that can help along the way, giving you more damage, leveling your talents, giving you another seal on your C6, with the notable ones being C1 to help reduce your charge attack stamina consumption, on top of giving you resistance interruption, which can be really nice, 6-1 giving you an additional seal, and especially her C4, which virtually just unlocks a new playstyle. Yanfei C4 will give you a okay shield, scaling on her HP that will absorb pyro damage very efficiently, and just be a, as I said, decent shield in general. What makes it nice though is that 1, she's a 4-star shield option, 2, she's a pyro shield option, and 3, she's a catalyst, meaning that you can run supportive weapons such as Prototype Amber for some healing and energy, or Thrilling Tales to give your active character a lot of attack, or Favonius Codex for some energy. All 3 of these options, notably Thrilling Tales or Prototype Amber can be really good at making her a complete support. You get a shield, you get maybe some healing and energy, and especially you can be another pyro option to help pyro swirl for certain pyro characters who don't have an easy way of applying pyro when off field. Hu Tao, for example, oftentimes will want a second pyro option if paired with a Hydro and an Emo character to be able to swirl pyro, reduce the pyro resistance of enemies to the Verdescent Venom set, and skyrocket her damage. Because Hu Tao can't apply pyro without using her skill, which has a long cooldown and duration, or using her burst, which is her burst and you don't want to use until you're inside of your skill, this means that you want another character who can apply pyro for you to then go into your Nemo character, swirl it, and then use Hu Tao or another pyro character and start DPSing on them. Because of this, having another pyro like Yanfei who can give you utility by giving you a shield, potentially healing and energy, or attack percent depending on what you're going for, provided you have her C4 and can now start being a shielder, makes her a more usable and viable option. Not a meta defining one, but definitely a good choice for certain teams. She typically will be used with someone like Hu Tao or even another pyro like Linny, and can get some value as just a pyro shielder and support with her C4, or a main 4-star DPS that you can also use as an okay option. And so overall, here are some of my general thoughts. I think Ming, being the new 4-star who is instantly available, is a great choice if you want the new character. Outside of that, almost literally in order here, these next 4 characters that appear are great options for most accounts. Xingqiu is always absolutely broken, and so are his Constellations. Xiangling and her 4th Constellation are insane, so you can choose her if it gets you closer or gets her 4th Constellation. Yaoyao is a great Dendro healer, and Beidou can be very powerful in certain Abyss rotations, while just generally being a good Electro unit, especially at C2. The other options here are more niche but viable. Yunjin could be great if you're playing a normal attacker. Yanfei can be a good shielder or a solid main DPS. Ningguang can be an okay main or sub DPS. And then Chongyun and Xinyan are more niche, less recommended, but if you want them, then feel free. Personally, I will be getting Ming as he's new, and I think his visuals and playstyle look pretty cool. With that said, I hope this video was helpful. If there's anything I want to add, it will be in a pinned comment. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.